We're listening to Geraldine Lamb, Capital Markets and Investment Banking Editor at The Banker Magazine, talking to Brian Kaplan, Editor of The Banker Magazine. So Brian, when you go off to Davos this year, what do you think are going to be the main themes for discussion?
Well, the World Economic Forum has been going for nearly 40 years now, and the view is that this is probably going to be the most exciting and most interesting meeting in the World Economic Forum's history. And obviously the reason for that is the international economic and financial crisis. And you're going to have a record number of world leaders attending the meeting. There's going to be some 41 heads of state. Included is the Chinese Premier Wen Jiabao, the Russian Prime Minister Vladimir Putin, Gordon Brown, who's the Prime Minister for the United Kingdom, Angela Merkel, who's the Chancellor of Germany, and Taro Aso, who's the Premier of Japan. And so you're going to have representation at the highest level there. There's 1,400 business leaders coming, and the theme of the meeting is shaping the post-crisis world. And I imagine, though, that there's going to be a huge amount of analysis at how we got into this situation and the kinds of policies that governments need to follow in order to revitalise their economies and repair the damage done to their banking sectors and their financial sectors. But also I suspect that there'll also be some looks at the question of the environment and climate change and innovation and investments in things like education and health and what needs to be done in those kinds of areas to improve things going forward.
So Gordon Brown has been very keen to stress that this is an international problem and it needs international cooperation. Do you think Davos is going to be a really good forum for this kind of cooperation? Is it going to be a really good platform, or is this kind of pie in the sky thinking?
I mean, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, I think that things will recover better in the world economy if there is good cooperation between the major economic powers. Because at the moment the risk is that governments take actions that are good for them nationally, but actually can be injurious to the world economy as a whole. And the more that the big economic blocs work together, America, Europe, and China, the big emerging markets, I think the better there is the chance of a resolution. I think it's very important that we have a good dialogue between the Chinese leadership and Europe and America, because if you remember, I mean, one of the reasons that we got into this kind of crisis is the fiscal imbalances, the trade imbalances rather, between America and China, where China was exporting everything to the United States and then lending them money to buy even more. And that's what first brought the cracks in the system. And it's important that we have to reconstruct a new system, and I think a lot of that involves Chinese boosting domestic demand and making sure that there's huge consumption in their own domestic market.
Do you think there's any sign, have you seen any signs that they are putting in that kind of framework to try and boost domestic consumption and to redress these imbalances?
Well, they certainly have put together a fiscal stimulus package, but the concern about, and it's on a big scale, but the concern about their package is that it's really more about just keeping the export machine running rather than really putting money into the pockets of the ordinary Chinese people. Because one of the problems is that the Chinese save 40% of their economy. And one of the reasons that Chinese save so much is because there's no welfare system, there's no health system that's free, and there's very little education. So the average Chinese family has to save for all these risks that they might encounter. Going forward, I mean, more of them are going to lose their jobs. So, I mean, I think there's going to be a certain amount of social discontent in China, and I think the leadership may respond to that by investing in education and health and generally making themselves more accountable. I think we might see some quite big changes in China.
I mean, presumably they have realised that the crisis has revealed to them, if they didn't know already, how vulnerable their economy is in a downturn when so much of your economy depends on export. So presumably it's in their interests to try and develop a more dynamic internal economy.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, I think they are realising it. I mean, hopefully they realise it quite quickly, because I think the temptation is just to carry on doing what you've always done before and not change it, because it worked once and you sort of expect that it's going to come back. But that's absolutely right. And of course, this is the first time in a way that the Chinese leadership has been faced with problems of this kind of nature, because obviously over the last 30 years their economy has become linked into the world economy in a way that it never was before. So in the past they've always been able to make policies more or less just dependent on China. Now they've got to make policies dependent on China and what's happening internationally.
So what do you think the post-crisis world is going to look like? Will it be radically different from the pre-crisis world?
I think there are going to be some big changes in the way that the public sector and the private sector balance each other. I mean, I think that the last 20 years we've seen a huge view that the private sector was basically the way of solving everybody's problems, and that it was the best method of wealth creation, and everybody had kind of adhered to that belief. And I don't think that's going to go away exactly, but I think there might be more of a balance between people saying, well, we need to do these kinds of things in the public sector, and we need to have a private sector that's dynamic, but also has to be better regulated.
And, well, looking at the financial sector, governments still seem to be struggling to find the right package of measures that will actually deal with the meltdown that they're experiencing. No sooner have they come up with one strategy than the situation deteriorates and therefore pushes banks into even greater distress, which means they need another package. The financial sector has now become the pariah in the economy, in the public mind. What is the impact? Where do you see the financial sector in the coming year?
I mean, I think the thing is, obviously, we're going through this massive deleveraging process, and however you approach it, it's going to be painful. And because the boom was so big and went on for so long, the downturn and the bust, as we're in now, is going to be sharp and very significant, and there's just no way out of that. I think that governments need to be aware of trying to do too many things to too many people, and they need to have some simple, bold solutions. So I think the two things that they need to do is, which they've done in most countries, is recapitalise the banks, and then secondly, set up some kind of hospital bank where the banks can put their bad assets. And I think they'd be better off staying out of guaranteeing credit in the credit markets, because I just think that leaves governments into making credit decisions which they're not good at.
And presumably, there's a case for governments and the media to try and redress the image of banking a little bit. Yes, there have been some serious mistakes made, but banking is essential to every economy. It's the thing that fuels growth. And there is a great deal of very good banking going on. There are still projects being financed. There are still trade flows being financed. This business continues to go. So we have to make sure we don't fall into this habit of turning bankers into the bogeyman. We've got to recognise them for what they are, but also praise them for what they do.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, it's very unfortunate that most of the international banks, have great businesses, and solid businesses in trade finance, in project finance, in transactions and cash management. Islamic finance is an area that's becoming extremely important, and these are all good businesses that make money and serve a purpose to the world economy year in, year out. And unfortunately, because one of the two things that have happened in particular areas of the bank, in the structured finance section, the whole image of banking has been brought into disrepute. I think the banks themselves will have to try and recover their image. But then I think the other thing is there's obviously going to be changes in regulation. And it almost seems that in a way that regulators have been concentrating too much on the individual firm, whereas the real problem has been at the level of the system. So no one's really been worrying about overall leverage levels or overall levels of indebtedness, and they were able to get out of proportion. And it was difficult for individual firms in a way not to go along the road because everybody else was doing it. So really that's where you want the regulator to be able to say stop to everybody and have some kind of moderation in terms of debt build-ups.
Okay, Brian, thank you very much. Good luck at Davos.
Thank you.